So hello and welcome to this fifth lesson in the Introduction to Python Programming series. Before we start, on your screen you will see 8 questions. Now I would like you to try and categorize those 8 questions into 3 different categories. So if you were asked to categorize those, what 3 different categories would you come up with where each question could only go into one category? Now, this is one of those questions where there's not really a right and wrong answer. There's one that I've come up with, but if you come up with something different, it doesn't at all mean it's wrong, but it does directly relate to what we're going to be covering today. Pause the video at this point and see what categories you can come up with. As I mentioned, this is lesson 5 in what I call Unit 3 Algorithms and Programming, but in short, our basic introduction to Python programming unit. By the end of today, we're going to understand that data can come in lots of different types, and we're going to know how to categorize different types of data. We're going to understand how we can create and change these within Python, and from that, we're going to create a Python program to undertake a range of different calculations to make our chatbot from previous lessons a little bit more interesting. So at this point, I'd like you to pause the video and I'd like you to open up Python in whatever way you've been doing that so far. So that might be opening Python on your computer, or it might be opening up Python online. If you're using Python online, then the link is in the description. So if you're unable to download anything on your own PC and install it, just jump on the website from the description below. I'd like you to create a program that introduces itself to the user, so says hello and says its name, and then it asks the person how old they are. I'd like it to save their response as a variable called age, and if you'd like as an extension, it could maybe give some form of reply. Now, this links directly into lesson 2 from this unit, so if you're struggling with this one at all, pause the video, have a quick flick back through the previous videos in this series and see if you can remind yourself how this works. Pause the video, the answer's coming up in a second. So hopefully you created something like this. We know from our early lessons that our print command is how we say something. So print, hello, my name is Dave. Print, I am the new improved version 2 chatbot. Print, let me prove it, how old are you? We then allow them to reply by putting age equals input. Now age is our variable name. In the previous lessons we were doing things like name equals input, but because we've asked their age, name doesn't really make any sense. The extension line could be something like, oh wow, age is a good age to be, and we're using that variable age in the reply. Keep that open, you're going to want that later on, but if you've really struggled with that, it might be worth pausing at this point and having a flick back through lesson 2. So data is a word that we hear quite often, and we're maybe not necessarily sure what data really means. So data can come in lots of different formats. We could have text data, we could have whole numbers, we could have decimal numbers, and possibly lists of data. And lists might be made up of any of text, numbers, or decimal numbers. When programming, it's really important that we understand the type of data we're dealing with because it makes a big difference. These are the key types of data that we're going to look at within our Introduction to Python unit. We've got integers. Now an integer is just a posh word for a whole number. Any number from -infinity up to infinity. A float. A float is our posh word for a decimal number. So any number that's not a whole number, any number that's got a decimal point would be called a float. A string. A string is a word, a sentence, or whole paragraphs. Anything with any words in at all would be a string. If we had something that said 53 Bob, that is a string rather than an integer, because although it's got a number in it, it's also got words, meaning it must be a string. Finally, we've then got our lists. Lists could be made up of a number of different numbers or a number of different strings. A class register, for example, is made up of a number of different names, meaning it would be stored as a list. So at this point, I would like you to pause the video and either in Microsoft Word or on a piece of scrap paper, I'd like you to make a table with 4 boxes. One box that says string, one that says integer, one that says float, and one that says list. I'd then like you to come up with a number of different questions and think, what would the answer be? Would the answer be a string, an integer, a float, or a list? Try and get maybe 3 or 4 questions in each box. So in the string box, you'd have 3 questions where the answer would always be a word. In the float box, you'd have 3 questions where the answer would always be a decimal number. Pause the video, the answers are coming up in just a second. So far in Python then, we've only really worried about strings. We've done a number of lessons where we've looked at asking people's names. Then we've said, what's your favourite sport? What's your favourite animal? But all of those things are strings. All of them are words. Today we're going to focus a little bit more on numbers. And we're going to get Python to do some clever calculations for us in terms of working out how old we are, maybe in minutes or seconds. At the moment in our Python program, we've asked how old they are, and we've saved that as the variable age. Now, Python will assume that everything in the program is a string unless you specifically tell it differently. Now, our age should be an integer because our age will be a whole number. I'll assume that people are always going to reply 11 or 12 or 13. Now we want to tell Python to convert age to an integer, and we do that using the bottom line of code on the screen. So age equals int age. We take the variable of age and we convert that to an integer, and we save it as age. So we overwrite the original variable as an integer. Now you can either add that now, or I'm going to pause the video in a minute and guide you through that. So if you're confident adding that, add that to the bottom line of your program. If not, hang fire and we'll look at a practical example in a minute. Once we've converted age to a variable, we can then do some calculations based on it. I'm saying that months old equals age old times 12. So how would I work out how many months old a person is? Well, I take the number of years old they are, age, and I times that by 12 because there are 12 months in a year. I've then calculated days old, and I've calculated that by taking months old times 30. There are 30 days in your average month, so I've calculated days old by timesing months old by 30. There are two ways of doing that. Mine is one. You could also just times age by 365 because we also know there's 365 days in a year. Once I know the number of days old they are, it'd be quite easy to work out the number of hours old they are by timesing the number of days old by 24 because I know that there are 24 hours in a day. Now at this point I'm going to move online and we're going to have a look at how we might implement that within Python Online. So here we are back in Python Online. I'm starting with a blank program, and again, if you're watching this video, you can find the link for Python Online in the comment section or in the description below. I'm going to start with my basic print command. Now we know how to do that. That's our print all in lowercase, remembering it must go blue. If you type print with a capital anywhere inside it, it's going to go black, and that is a problem. Now, this program revolves around this question of how old are you? And the print statement we should know from our earlier lessons. I put it in speech marks, it all goes red, wonderful. I then want to allow them to reply, so I'm going to put age equals input, remembering that we have those two brackets at the end of the input line. Now I could at that point do something like print O plus age plus is a good age. And that's not overly interesting because it's just going to say that to every user no matter how old they are. So if I run that on my side over here, if I reply back with 13 and press enter, it's going to say, oh, 13 is a good age. So that's not overly interesting there. What we want to do as part of the slide we've just looked at is convert age to an integer. Now that tells Python that age must be a whole number. Now if you run the program, not a great deal different is going to happen. It's going to come up over here asking how old I am. I'm going to reply back and the program's going to stop because I don't have a print line. The one difference is that if you reply back with something silly like Bob, it's not going to like that because it knows that Bob isn't a number. So it says invalid literal for int, meaning that is an invalid integer, so that won't work. What I can now do though is use age in some mathematical calculations. So I know that age is the number of years old a person is. I could say that months old is age times by 12 because there are 12 months in every year. I could then work out days old and say days old equals age times 365 because I know there are 365 days in a year. Now with these variables, it'd be quite tempting to do something like that. That looks better, but it won't work. You can't have spaces in variable names. If you're struggling to read that, use an underscore. An underscore will allow you to sort of have a space without it showing you an error. That's up to you, but it can't have a space. If I then want to work out how many hours old someone is, I'm going to take days old and I'm going to times that by 24 because I know there are 24 hours in a day. Now you can go as far on with that as you want to. I know that minutes old, for example, will be hours old times by 60 because I know there are 60 minutes in an hour. Like I say, you could certainly do seconds. Seconds is fairly easy. There are 60 seconds in a minute. But you could then, if you want to, go on and find out, well, how many milliseconds are there in a second? How many nanoseconds are there in a second? You can certainly find that information on Google and add those calculations in if you want to. I'm going to jump back to the PowerPoint now, and you're going to give that one a go. So now that we've looked at my example, I would like you to pause the video and have a go at this activity. I'd like you to create some code which converts age into an integer. I'd then like you to do some calculations to work out how many months old and days old the user is. If you complete that, I would like you to see what other calculations you could add. You could maybe add hours old, minutes old, even seconds old by doing some different calculations. Now I'm going to put the answer up in a minute, so give that a good go, but if you struggle, don't panic at all. The answer will be on your screen in the next couple of seconds. Pause the video, give it a go, and then have a look at the answer to check what you've got. So you're going to want some code like this. We've got our print, how old are you, age equals input, and I've then converted age to an integer. I've then done 5 calculations: months old, days old, hours old, minutes old, and seconds old, by timesing by 12, 365, 24, 60, and 60. I know that there are 60 minutes in an hour, so I times by 60. I know there are 60 seconds in a minute, so again I times by 60. Hopefully you've got some code like that. It won't tell you the answer yet. When you run that, it will just ask you the question and it won't give you the answer. That's what we're going to sort out next. Check your program runs. If it doesn't, pause the video and update your code so that it looks like mine. So, the bit we're missing from our program is printing out the answer. To print out a variable in Python, we need to convert it back to a string. So Python won't print integers, but it will print strings. Now I can do that using the line of code at the bottom. Hours old equals str, or string, hours old. So I'm converting the variable hours old, which at the moment is an integer, into a string, and that will then let me print out the answer at the end. And I can do that using a normal print statement. I'm going to jump online and we're going to have a look at exactly how that will work in Python. So we're now back on in Python Online, and we can find our code from last time. The main activity here is going to be to print out how many seconds old a person is. So I need to add in my seconds old calculation because I didn't do that last time. And we know that to use seconds old, we need to convert it back to a string. So I'm going to put seconds old equals str seconds old. Now it's really important that the seconds old there is spelled the same as there and the same as there. Now if I sort of highlight it online, you'll notice it highlights slightly lighter all the other versions of that word. Now if I'd spelt seconds old wrong here, when I highlight it, it doesn't highlight there. Now that, if you're having problems with your code, is a starting point. Are all of those phrases definitely spelled exactly the same way? Even this would make it go wrong, because seconds old is not written exactly the same way because it's got a capital S. But I've now converted that to a string. To make that print out, I'm going to say print UR, and I'm going to then add in seconds old, remembering to spell it exactly the same, another plus, number of seconds old. Now, you'll notice I've got my plus there inside of the speech marks. That's important. If I don't have my speech marks, when I run my program, it's going to put it all in one word. Okay, so there's no space there, and number and there are joined up. So my spaces there are really important. However, once we run that, our program is definitely working. How old are you? If you say 13, you're approximately that many seconds old to the nearest year. Now, that's going to get you your work working and your program working for today. If you wanted to change it so it was hours old instead, you'd simply change everywhere it says seconds down here to hours, making sure you spell it correctly, and change it there. So if you run that one, we're obviously expecting the number of hours old we are to be quite a lot less than the number of seconds. I've got a problem. Why have I got a problem? Well, I've spelled hours old wrong over here. I added in my extra S. So when you get something like that, it's telling you that one of your variables somewhere isn't spelled correctly. I'd be surprised if anyone gets their entire program working without a single error. So if you are 13, you're 113,880 hours old to the nearest year. As I said on the PowerPoint section, you could add in an if statement here to make your program a little bit more complicated. If you're flying ahead with this unit, you could possibly give that a go. So now that we've finished my example, you should be able to have a go at finishing your program. I'd like you to get your program so that it prints out at least one of the answers, so maybe hours old, or you could print out seconds old or minutes old. Now, if you're absolutely flying ahead with this unit, you could do an if statement that asks the user, would you like to see the number of hours, or the number of minutes, or the number of seconds? And depending on what they say, you show them the correct and different answer. Now, that is a real extension if you are really flying ahead. If you've got this far in 5 minutes, give that one a go. Pause the video at this point. The answer is going to be coming up in a couple of seconds. Again, if you're struggling, please do give it a go. Worst case scenario, your code won't work and you can copy it from the slide coming up in just a second, but certainly give it a go first. So here is our sort of final activity answer. We've got our calculations from earlier. I've then taken seconds old and converted it to a string, and I've said to the user, you are seconds old, number of seconds old. Now, converting that to a string is really, really important. If you keep it as an integer, it's going to print it out thousands of times and give you totally the wrong answer. It will look like it works, but it won't be. Okay, now that's going to work out how many seconds old you are to the nearest year. So it's not totally accurate. It's not going to tell you to the sort of the minute that you run the program, but it's going to give you a good idea in terms of the basic idea of how many seconds old you are. If you got that working, brilliant, give the extension a go. If you haven't, pause the video at this point and try and get to a point where the code works before we think about finishing this unit up. So there we go. That is our sort of final Python program for this unit. Hopefully you know how to do your basic print statements and take in some variables, but as part of this lesson we've also learnt how we can convert variables and undertake different calculations. The final lesson in this series is going to be a quick multiple choice test to let you know how you've got on in terms of the bits you know and any bits you maybe want to have another look at. But you should now have all the skills that you need to create a basic Python program. As always, if you have any questions, please post those either onto Google Classroom or into the comments section below. Thank you very much.